My boyfriend moved to another state without me. A year later, he wants to fix things. Am I wrong for feeling insecure? My boyfriend, 34M, and I, 32F, had been together for 6 years before any of this happened. We lived together, had a shared apartment, shared bills, shared friends. From the outside, we probably looked very stable. A typical week was pretty predictable. We both worked during the day, came home around the same time, cooked dinner together or ordered takeout if we were too tired. We'd eat on the couch, half watching a show while talking about our days. On weekends we grocery shopped, did laundry, maybe saw friends or just stayed in and recharged. Nothing dramatic, comfortable, familiar, but there were cracks, even if neither of us really named them. I didn't love my job. It wasn't terrible, but it felt stagnant. I'd tell him stories over dinner about work politics, lack of growth, feeling like I was just waiting for something better to happen. He'd listen, nod, tell me I deserved more. Sometimes I'd joke that I felt stuck, and he'd squeeze my hand and say, "You'll figure it out." His job, on the other hand, consumed him. Late nights, long hours, constant stress. He worked for a company that talked big about growth and loyalty, but I remember thinking even then that it didn't seem as stable as he thought. He'd come home exhausted, laptop still open, answering emails at 10 or 11 at night. I worried about burnout, but he brushed it off. This is just how it is in my field. We talked about the future, but mostly in that vague, safe way couples do when they assume time is on their side. The state he eventually moved to did come up, but always in a planning context. Like when we were on vacation, or scrolling through photos online. What felt more real were our conversations about staying where we were. Talking about buying a house eventually. Talking about building careers here. Talking about 5-year plans that assumed we were still in the same place, together. That was the life I thought we were working toward. Then he got laid off. It came out of nowhere. Organizational changes. Nothing to do with his performance, but it hit him hard anyway. I remember the shock in his voice when he told me. He'd tied so much of his identity to that job. I immediately went into support mode. I reassured him constantly. Told him he was talented, that something better would come along. Helped him rewrite his resume. Listened to him vent about the unfairness of it all. Picked up more emotional slack while he was spiraling. I didn't resent that at all at the time. That's what partners do. When one person stumbles, the other steadies them. That's why what came next hurt the way it did. Because in my head, we were facing this together. We were a team figuring out the next step after a setback. I didn't realize yet that, in his mind, he was already making plans on his own. When the possibility of the job first came up, I felt anxious almost immediately. I tried to bring it up early, but every time I did, he brushed it off. "I haven't even gotten the offer yet," he'd say. "Let's not stress about something hypothetical." So I tried not to, even though my stomach stayed tight every time the topic came up. Before anything was official, we took a trip to the state where the job was. On paper, it was beautiful. Mountains, clean air, quieter pace of life. I wanted to like it. I really did. But while he was talking excitedly about where his office would be, I was doing mental math. I remember sitting in a cafe while he stepped outside to take a call. I pulled up local job boards on my phone. I refreshed, changed keywords, broadened the search. There was almost nothing in my field. A few listings that paid far less than what I was making. A few that required connections I didn't have. I watched people walk by outside the window and felt this sudden wave of loneliness, even though I wasn't alone. I tried to picture my days there. The commute, the routines, him gone all day, energized by new work, and me, stuck. Isolated, dependent. The scenery was beautiful, but it felt like a place where his life would grow and mine would shrink. When I told him later that I didn't see myself living there, he looked surprised. "I thought you loved this place," he said. "I loved it as a place to visit," I tried to explain. "Not as a place to build a life where I don't have options." Still, nothing was official yet. I kept hoping the offer wouldn't come. Then it did. I cried when he told me. Not because I wasn't happy for him, but because it felt like a door was closing. We had the same conversation over and over, just in different forms. He talked in numbers. "It's a 40% raise. This is huge for my career. This gives us long-term security." I talked in questions. What would I do there? Am I supposed to give up my career? Are we just doing long distance indefinitely? At one point I said, through tears, "I don't want to be a long-distance partner who's waiting around for you to come home." He looked frustrated but calm. "You're thinking worst case," he said. "You'll find something once you're there. Things will work out." But that was exactly what scared me. That my future was being treated as a vague assumption. We weren't yelling. We weren't threatening to break up. That almost made it worse. It was two people speaking completely different languages. Logic versus fear. I don't think he ever heard me say, "I'm scared of this." I think he heard, "I'm anxious and holding you back." I can see his side now more clearly than I could then. The offer had a deadline. Saying no felt permanent, like choosing uncertainty over progress, like turning down something he might never get again. I imagine him thinking, "She'll come around. Once she's there, she'll find something. I'm doing this for us." But from my side, it didn't feel like, for us. It felt like a decision being made at me. He accepted the offer. The days after were heavy in a way I still struggle to describe. We didn't fight. We just moved around each other carefully, like we were both pretending nothing fundamental had changed. He started packing. I stayed. Boxes filled our apartment. His things disappeared first. His side of the closet emptied out. His books went into storage. The place slowly stopped feeling like ours. The first night he slept somewhere else, I lay in our half-empty bed and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't sob. I just felt this quiet grief settle in, like I'd already lost something but didn't have permission to call it a loss yet. That was the moment the long-distance relationship really began. Not with a goodbye at the airport, but with silence in a room that used to feel like home. The long-distance part was never supposed to last this long. At first, we treated it like a temporary phase. Something we just had to get through. The early visits almost felt hopeful. When I went to see him, we acted like tourists. We explored the city, tried new restaurants, went on long walks. He'd point things out and say, "You'd love this place," and I'd nod, trying to picture a version of myself who did. I applied for jobs while I was there, usually from cafes or his apartment while he was at work. I told myself it felt proactive. It didn't. Mostly it felt like sending my resume into nothing. Still, those early visits had an energy to them. Like we were pretending the distance was a challenge we were actively solving. Over time, the tone changed. Later visits felt heavier. We stayed in Airbnbs or his apartment and spent more time on our laptops than exploring. Conversations revolved around job postings I'd sent, interviews that went nowhere, and whether I should broaden my search even more. Arguments started popping up in strange places, small kitchens, grocery store aisles, quiet nights where neither of us knew how to end the conversation without hurting the other. Nothing explosive, just tension that never really resolved. Financially, he was supporting me in a way that was generous but complicated. He paid his new rent and more than half of mine back home. At first, I was grateful. Then I started feeling uncomfortable. Then embarrassed. Then quietly resentful. I'd always been independent. I paid my own bills. I had my own life. Now I felt like I was slowly slipping into a role I never agreed to, the partner waiting for her life to start again. I wondered if he resented it too, even if he never said it. If the money felt like proof, to him, that he was sacrificing for us. If it made it easier for him to believe the move had been justified. Meanwhile, our lives were drifting in parallel directions. Back home, my world got smaller. Friends stopped inviting me to couples dinners. People assumed I was, basically moving soon, and treated me like I was already halfway gone. I floated between spaces, not fully belonging anywhere. I stayed busy, but it felt like I was treading water. Waiting. His life, though, was expanding. He talked about new projects, new coworkers, new opportunities. People at his job knew him as single-minded, dedicated, flexible. No one there saw the long-distance relationship or the compromises behind it. They just saw someone who'd shown up and committed fully. Sometimes I'd hang up after a call and realize he sounded energized, while I felt drained. At some point, we started looking for compromises. Different states, middle ground cities, places where he could keep working in his field, even if it meant a pay cut, and where I might actually find a job. We made spreadsheets, salary comparisons, cost of living, job listings, commute times. Every option felt like a loss for one of us. If the city was good for him, it was bad for me. If it was better for me, it meant he'd be giving something up. Each row on the spreadsheet felt like a quiet argument we weren't fully having. By then, the year had almost passed. We were still together, still kind to each other, still saying we wanted the same things. But it felt like we were orbiting the same problem without ever landing anywhere solid. And underneath all of it was a growing fear I didn't know how to say out loud yet. If this much distance and uncertainty came from one decision, how were we supposed to make bigger ones together? The insecurity didn't come out of nowhere. It came in waves, usually triggered by small things that shouldn't have felt so big. Sometimes it was seeing a couple apartment hunting in my neighborhood, talking excitedly about layouts and timelines. I'd smile politely and then go home and cry, because I didn't even know what city I was supposed to imagine myself in anymore. Sometimes it was work, a friend getting promoted at the job I already felt stuck in. People talking about long-term plans at the office, while I felt like I was living on pause, waiting for a decision that might never fully include me. And sometimes it was him. Like the night he missed our anniversary call because he was at a work dinner. He texted afterward, apologetic, saying it ran late and he couldn't step away. I said I understood, I even meant it, but later, lying in bed alone, I stared at the ceiling and thought, of course his work came first. It always has. Those moments would build until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I'd bring it up carefully at first. I just want to say how I'm feeling, I'd start. I still feel really hurt about how the move happened. He'd sigh, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. I've apologized for that, he'd say. I told you it wasn't ideal. But I felt invisible, I'd say. Like my future didn't matter in that decision. Then the conversation would slide into the same loop it always did. I didn't have many choices, he'd say. I was laid off. This job was a huge opportunity. I'm paying for 2 places. And suddenly, my pain wasn't the topic anymore. I'd try again. I know it was hard for you. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying it hurt me. But what was I supposed to do? He'd ask, defensive now. Say no and throw my career away. That question always stopped me. Because there was no answer that didn't make me sound unreasonable. So I'd back down. I'd say I wasn't blaming him. That I just wanted him to understand. He'd nod. Say he got it. Say he was sorry that I felt that way. And nothing would change. Each time, it left a small scar. Not a huge one. Just enough to make me hesitate before bringing it up again. Enough to make me feel like my feelings were inconvenient, or poorly timed, or unfair. Eventually, we tried couples therapy. I remember sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both of us tense but polite. We told the story the way we always did. He explained the job, the raise, the pressure. I explained the fear, the isolation, the feeling of being left behind. The therapist listened quietly for a long time. Then she said something that landed harder than anything either of us had said to each other. It sounds like the move wasn't just about geography, she said slowly. It sounds like it was a message, intentional or not, about whose dreams take precedence in this partnership. The room went silent. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in months. He looked uncomfortable, not angry, just unsettled. She continued, and until that's acknowledged directly, you're going to keep having the same argument. Not about the job, but about safety and partnership. We left the session quiet. In the car afterward, he said, I don't think that's fair. I did this for us. I didn't argue. I just stared out the window and wondered how something could be done for us while still making me feel so alone. That was when the insecurity really set in. Not the kind where you doubt your partner's love, but the kind where you doubt your place in their life. And once that question exists, it doesn't go away easily. He didn't say it during a fight. That's what made it worse. We were on the phone, late, both of us exhausted in that way that comes after too many circular conversations and not enough sleep. There was no yelling, no tears, just long pauses and the sound of him breathing on the other end. I don't even remember exactly what I said before it happened. Something small, something tired, probably. I still feel like I didn't matter. There was a long silence. Longer than usual. Then he said it. I think, if I'm being honest, I think the decision was selfish. His voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't sharp. It was flat, almost resigned, like he'd finally stopped trying to protect the version of himself he'd been defending for the last year. I knew it would hurt you, he continued. I just didn't think it would hurt this much. Or for this long. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't have words, but because my body felt like it had gone hollow. Like something had finally cracked open and all the air rushed out at once. After we hung up, I just sat there in silence. And then my brain did something I couldn't stop. It replayed the last year. Over and over. But this time, everything looked different. Every time he paid rent. Not generosity, but guilt. Every time he reassured me. Not love, but damage control. Every logistical conversation. Not us figuring things out, but him managing the consequences of a choice he already knew was wrong. It was like someone had taken the same memories and changed the lighting. And suddenly, none of them felt clean anymore. The fear shifted too. Before, the pain had been, he didn't consider me enough. Now it was darker. He considered me, and chose himself anyway. That's a completely different injury. That's not miscommunication. That's not bad timing. That's a conscious prioritization. Later, he tried to soften it. I mean, you're more important than any job, he said quickly, like he was afraid of what he'd just admitted. I would always choose you. And that's when the doubt set in, quiet, steady, relentless. Because if that were true, the offer letter wouldn't have been a deadline he faced alone. The decision wouldn't have been framed as inevitable. I wouldn't have found out I was optional after the fact. If I were really more important than any job, then my fear wouldn't have been something to override. It would have been something to stop for. I didn't say any of that out loud. But I thought it. And once you think something like that, you can't unthink it. Now I'm stuck with this new, brutal clarity, one that doesn't come with easy answers. Because love can survive fear. It can survive uncertainty. It can even survive mistakes. But I don't know if it survives the knowledge that when it mattered most, I wasn't chosen. I've realized something over the last few weeks. There's no version of this where no one resents anyone. If he quits his job and moves for me, he will resent me. Maybe not right away, maybe not consciously, but it will surface someday. During a stressful week, a missed promotion, a throwaway comment about what could have been. And if I move for him, I will resent him. Not just for the job, but for the fact that when the moment came, my life was treated like a variable that could be solved later. So the question isn't how do we avoid resentment. It's whose resentment are we willing to live with. And that's when I knew I couldn't keep drifting. I told him I needed to stop existing in this phase where every month feels like a temporary extension of a decision we never made together. I told him I couldn't keep planning my life around, eventually. So I gave him a plan. Not a threat, not an emotional plea, a plan. I said, I need you to actively look for a job in a compromised city, somewhere viable for both of us, by some date. If that doesn't happen, I have to start building a life here. Not as a placeholder, not as a waiting room, but as my real life. There was a long silence after I said it. He asked, quietly, are you giving me an ultimatum? And I surprised myself with how calm I felt when I answered. No, I'm setting a boundary, because the truth is, this decision has already been made once, just not by both of us. I told him I don't want him to quit out of guilt. I don't want him to move because he's afraid of losing me. And I don't want to move because I'm afraid of losing 6 years. We agreed, finally, to start intensive couples therapy, not to fix logistics, but to answer the question we've been avoiding for a year. Can we rebuild a relationship where both people feel chosen, not accommodated? Or has that trust already been quietly eroding while we pretended to negotiate cities and salaries? A few days later, I talked to my mom. I didn't even plan to. It just came out while we were on the phone, my voice cracking in a way I didn't recognize. She listened quietly. Then she asked me one question. You've given 6 years to this relationship, she said. If this were year 1, would you still be fighting this hard to stay? I didn't answer right away. Then she asked the harder question. Are you staying because you love him, or because you're afraid of what it would mean if those 6 years didn't lead where you thought they would? That question sat in my chest like a weight. Because I do love him. But I'm starting to realize that love isn't the only thing keeping me here anymore. Fear is too. Fear of starting over. Fear of being wrong. Fear that walking away would mean admitting that sometimes, commitment doesn't guarantee alignment. And now, for the first time in a year, it feels like the future isn't something happening to me anymore. It's something I have to choose. Even if the choice hurts. We didn't fix everything. That's the first thing I want to be honest about. There was no single conversation where the past year suddenly made sense, no cinematic moment where trust snapped back into place. What we did instead was something quieter and harder. We chose. After weeks of therapy sessions that left us wrung out and raw, after spreadsheets and job alerts and uncomfortable silences, he found a position in a compromised city. It paid less. It wasn't his dream job. And it wasn't the place I would have chosen if I were starting from scratch. But it was the first decision in a year that felt like ours. The move itself was strangely anticlimactic. No excitement, no relief, just logistics. Boxes, change of address forms, the shared exhaustion of lifting furniture into a space that didn't yet feel like home. The city is fine, not breathtaking, just livable, and maybe that's the point. We talk differently now, slower, more carefully. There are moments where I still flinch, when he mentions work with too much enthusiasm, when I catch myself wondering if this is another temporary stop before the next big opportunity that leaves me behind again. Trust, I've learned, doesn't return all at once. It comes back in fragments. In him checking in before applying for anything new. In me saying when something hurts instead of storing it away. In therapy sessions where we don't defend ourselves, but actually listen. Some days still feel heavy. Sometimes I wonder if choosing each other again means choosing discomfort over certainty. If love, at this stage, is less about passion and more about accountability. But there's something different now. I no longer feel invisible. Not because everything is perfect, but because when we talk about the future, my life is no longer an afterthought. It's part of the blueprint. This isn't the story I thought I'd be telling after 6 years together. It's smaller, more complicated, less romantic, but it's honest. And for now, that feels like enough. We moved 3 months ago. I keep saying that number to myself like it should mean something more concrete than it does. Long enough to unpack, long enough to learn the grocery store layout, long enough to stop using Google Maps for the drive home. Long enough, I think, for the adrenaline of starting over to wear off. The move itself was strangely cooperative. We worked well as a team again, which felt comforting and unsettling at the same time. Like muscle memory kicking in. We argued about couch placement, laughed when a box labeled kitchen turned out to be bathroom supplies, fell asleep on the floor the first night because the bed frame hadn't arrived yet. From the outside, it probably looked like a fresh start. Inside, it felt more like walking carefully on a recently healed bone. The city is fine. That's the word I keep coming back to. It doesn't inspire me, but it doesn't drain me either. There are enough jobs that I don't feel panicked anymore, and enough normalcy that my days don't feel like placeholders. I did eventually find work. Not my dream job, not a huge leap forward, but something solid. Something that belongs to me. The first paycheck hit my account and I cried in the car. Not because of the money, but because it meant I wasn't dependent anymore. I wasn't waiting. He started his new job a few weeks before I did. I watched him adjust. Less energized than before, more tired, occasionally distant. He never says he regrets it, but sometimes I catch the pause before he answers when people ask how he likes the city. That pause still scares me. We're still in therapy. We talk about the move like it's not a solution, just a condition. Trust is the real work. We keep circling back to the same question. How do we make sure neither of us disappears again when things get hard? Some days feel good, ordinary good, cooking dinner together, walking around our neighborhood at night, talking about weekend plans without the shadow of when one of us leaves again. Other days, I feel the old ache. I'll see a job posting in his old state, or hear him talk about a former colleague's promotion, and I'll wonder, quietly, privately, whether this was the moment he agreed to shrink so I could feel safe. And then I hate myself for thinking that. Because I don't want to be the person he sacrificed for. I want to be the person he chose with. We're learning how to ask harder questions now, before decisions are made. We're learning that love isn't just staying, it's checking in. Over and over, even when it's uncomfortable. I don't know yet if this move saved our relationship. But I do know this. For the first time in over a year, we wake up in the same place. We go to sleep in the same bed. We face the same direction when we talk about tomorrow. And right now, that feels like progress. A few weeks in when the novelty really wore off. The cracks came first. They were small, at least on the surface. Little comments that landed wrong. Him mentioning how much busier his old team used to be. Me getting quiet instead of curious. A familiar tension creeping into conversations that had nothing to do with jobs or cities but somehow circled back to them anyway. One night, we argued over something stupid. Dishes, I think. It always seems to be dishes. He said, I feel like no matter what I do, I'm still paying for that decision. And there it was. Not resentment exactly, but its outline. I felt it too. Mine just looked different. It showed up as hypervigilance. Listening for disappointment in his voice. Watching his face when he talked about work. Bracing myself for the day he'd say, I tried, but this isn't enough for me. That night, instead of escalating, we stopped. That alone felt like growth. In therapy, we finally named it. The therapist said something that stuck with me. Resentment doesn't mean the choice was wrong. It means the loss hasn't been grieved yet. So we started grieving. He grieved the version of his career that might have grown faster somewhere else. I grieved the belief that love would automatically protect me from being sidelined. Some sessions were brutal, others were quiet, but for the first time, we weren't arguing about what should have happened. We were talking about what it cost both of us. The growth showed up in unexpected places. In him telling me when he felt restless instead of burying it. In me admitting when I felt scared instead of accusatory. In us checking in before small decisions, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. There was one moment that stayed with me. We were walking through a neighborhood we'd started to like, half talking about nothing, and he said, almost offhandedly, I'm glad we chose this together. Not, I'm glad I did this for you. Not, I hope this was worth it. I didn't respond right away. I just squeezed his hand. It wasn't a grand repair. It didn't erase the past year. But it felt like a stitch holding something fragile in place. The cracks are still there. I can see them if I look too closely. I know we're not immune to repeating old patterns if we stop paying attention. But the growth feels real. Not dramatic. Not Instagram-worthy. Just two people learning how not to disappear when it would be easier to do so. And for now, that feels like the most honest version of hope I've had in a long time. 6 months feels like a milestone people expect clarity from. Like by now, I should know. Like there should be an answer. The truth is, the fear didn't disappear. It changed. In the beginning, fear was loud, constant, sharp. It lived in my chest and flared up every time his phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification or he talked too excitedly about work. Now it's softer, quieter, almost polite. It shows up as a question instead of a panic. Are we still choosing each other today? Life here has settled into something real. I've grown into my job. Not in a, this is my passion, way, but in a grounded way. I contribute. I'm respected. I don't feel invisible anymore. That alone has shifted something fundamental in me. He's doing okay. Not thriving, not miserable. Somewhere in between. He's more honest now when he's frustrated, and I appreciate that, even when it scares me. At least I'm not guessing anymore. We don't fight the way we used to. But sometimes that worries me too. Because peace can mean healing, or it can mean exhaustion. The biggest test came unexpectedly. A former colleague of his reached out about an opportunity. Not an offer, just a conversation. Different state, bigger scope, more money. He told me the same day. That alone felt like progress. We talked about it calmly, rationally, like adults who had learned something the hard way. He said he wasn't pursuing it. I believed him, mostly. But that night, lying next to him in the dark, I realized something uncomfortable. The fear wasn't about him leaving anymore. It was about whether I'd recognize myself if he stayed. Whether I'd always be bracing for the next moment I'd have to defend my place in his life. Whether this relationship had taught me to be alert instead of secure. Therapy helped us name that too. Our therapist asked me, gently, do you feel chosen now, or just included? I didn't answer right away. Because some days, I do feel chosen. In the way he shows up. In how he listens. In the way he plans with me instead of around me. And other days, I feel included. Like someone whose needs are now carefully accounted for, but still negotiable. The fear hasn't faded, but it no longer controls me. I'm no longer staying because I'm afraid to leave. I'm staying because I'm watching. Because I'm learning. Because I'm allowing this version of us the chance to prove itself. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not certainty, but clarity about what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not anymore. 6 months in, I don't know how this story ends. But I do know this. If it breaks again, it won't be because I ignored myself. And for the first time, that feels like safety. I didn't notice it at first. That's the strange thing about safety, you don't feel it arrive. You just realize one day that you're no longer bracing. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No therapy session, no breakthrough conversation, just life. He texted me in the middle of the afternoon, thinking about applying for an internal role. Can we talk tonight? A year ago, that message would have sent my heart racing. I would have spent the rest of the day spiraling, rewriting arguments in my head, preparing myself to either fight or fold. This time, I didn't. I finished my work. I went for a walk. I came home. And when we talked, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a conversation. He asked what I thought. He listened, really listened. Not to respond, not to reassure, but to understand. He didn't make a decision that night. Neither did I. And somehow, that was enough. That's when it hit me. Love wasn't feeling like a risk anymore because I wasn't alone inside it. The fear used to come from not knowing where I stood. From realizing decisions were being made about me, not with me. From feeling like my life was something to be adjusted around someone else's trajectory. Now, when something big comes up, it slows us both down. Not because we're afraid, but because we respect what's at stake. I still have moments of doubt. I don't think those ever fully disappear. But they don't define my days anymore. I don't monitor his happiness like a meter for my future. I don't feel like I have to earn my place by being flexible, agreeable, or understanding at my own expense. I exist in this relationship again. There was another moment, smaller, but just as telling. We were filling out paperwork for something boring. Insurance, maybe. He listed me as his emergency contact without hesitation. No pause. No glance in my direction, checking. It wasn't romantic, but it felt like a choice. And I realized something quietly profound. Love stopped feeling like a risk when I stopped feeling disposable. Not because everything is perfect. Not because we'll never hurt each other again. But because when things get hard, I trust that I'll be part of the conversation, not the consequence. We didn't fix this by moving cities. We fixed it by relearning how to choose each other in the small, unglamorous moments where it actually counts. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not naive enough to think this was the final test. But for the first time in a long time, loving him doesn't feel like gambling with my life. It just feels like living it. I've thought a lot about why this didn't end the way it easily could have. Because if I'm honest, most stories like ours don't resolve. They just fade. One person adapts, the other advances, and resentment quietly replaces intimacy. What made the difference wasn't the compromise city, or therapy alone, or even love, as much as I wish that were enough. It worked because something fundamental changed. First, we stopped pretending the problem was logistical. For a long time, we framed everything as where to live, which job to take, how to make the numbers work. But the real issue was never geography. It was power. Who gets to move forward when lives are misaligned? Whose fear gets treated as negotiable? Whose dreams are framed as necessary and whose are framed as flexible? Until we named that, every solution was temporary. Second, accountability replaced justification. For a year, his explanations were logical, reasonable, even defensible, but nothing shifted until he stopped explaining and started owning. I was selfish. Wasn't a punishment, it was a turning point. Because it acknowledged harm without trying to balance it against intention. Third, I stopped bargaining for my worth. This part was on me. I stayed too long in a dynamic where being, understanding, meant being smaller. Where love felt like proving I could adapt fast enough to keep up. The moment I set a real boundary, not an emotional plea, not a threat, everything changed. Not because ultimatums save relationships, but because clarity reveals whether there's something left to save. Fourth, we grieved instead of rushing to fix. We didn't just choose a new city, his career momentum, my sense of safety, the version of our relationship we thought we had. Finally, and this is the hardest part, it worked because we both chose discomfort. Not once, repeatedly. He chose the discomfort of slowing down instead of surging ahead. I chose the discomfort of staying present instead of protecting myself by emotionally exiting. And that's why it so often doesn't work. Because usually, one person does the uncomfortable work while the other benefits from it. Because love alone doesn't correct imbalance. Because compromise without accountability breeds quiet resentment. Because staying is easier than rebuilding, but rebuilding requires both people to show up differently. This worked because we finally chose each other at the same time. And because neither of us pretended that choice was painless. Right now, things are steady. Not perfect, not fragile, just real. We've been in this city long enough that it finally feels like ours. We have a favorite coffee shop. A walking route we default to without thinking. Neighbors who recognize us. The kind of small, ordinary markers that quietly turn a place into home. Our relationship feels similar. We still go to therapy, though less frequently now. Not because we've graduated, but because it's become maintenance instead of crisis management. When old patterns start to surface, we catch them earlier. When something feels off, it actually gets said. That alone feels like a different relationship. The fear hasn't vanished entirely. I don't think it ever will. But it no longer runs the show. It sits in the background now. A reminder of what happens when communication stops and assumptions take over. He's grown in ways I didn't expect. He checks in before making plans that affect both of us. He talks about work without centering it as the axis of our future. And when opportunities come up, they're framed as questions, not conclusions. I've changed too. I don't over-explain my needs anymore. I don't apologize for wanting stability. I don't make myself smaller to keep the peace. I trust myself to notice when something feels wrong, and to say something before it becomes a problem. We talk about the future now. Not in sweeping, romantic terms, but in grounded ones. Where we want to live. What kind of life we're actually building. What we're both unwilling to sacrifice again. There's still uncertainty. There always will be, but it feels shared. If this ends someday, it won't be because we avoided the hard conversations. And if it lasts, it won't be because one of us disappeared to make it work. That's where we are now. Two people who broke something, named it, and chose, every day since, not to pretend it never happened. I don't know what the long-term outcome will be, but for the first time in a long time, I'm just here, and that feels like enough.